The JSE is aiming to cut red tape.
Indeed, that is what is going to take place from the 1st of June, Stephen, and this is part of the amendments that the JSE is making. But to expand on this issue, we are joined now virtually on the line by Visser, who is the Director for Issuers and Regulations at the JSE. Andre, thank you so much for your time. First of all, I would like to find out what really necessitated the engagements with the stakeholders in this regard, as well as how we get to amending the requirement for listing on the JSE.
Thank you, Tumisang. Yes, I think it's towards the end of 20 and 2021, there was some clear noises in the market where issuers and stakeholders were raising concerns about the level of regulation. And I think the experiences that companies were having with COVID, I think, just made the issue more prominent. And what we did as a responsible listings authority, we engaged with those stakeholders. And that basically resulted in us publishing a consultation document to obtain the views from a broader stakeholder group to identify those issues that we could potentially amend to make the burden on companies a bit easier. It was quite important for us to strike the right balance, and therefore we thought we would publish a number of proposals to start the debate, but more importantly to get input from the market so that we could separate the noise from the facts. And that process that was started in 2021 resulted in us publishing the SENS announcement yesterday morning with the actual amendments that have now been made and will be effective on the 1st of June.
What sticks out is that the aim is to cut red tape, and you spoke about eliminating the noise, really not making this issue one that would be seemingly political. How robust were these engagements? Because we understand that the FSCSA was also involved.
Yes, Tumisang, look, through statute and through the Financial Markets Act, the FSCA is the public sector regulator, and we cannot make any changes without their final approval. So we followed the normal due process, and we managed to get their final approval that resulted in that publication on SENS yesterday. What I can say is we had very good support from broad stakeholders in the markets, and these are individual stakeholders, but also stakeholder groups that gave very strong support for these changes and that were very positive about the impact that these changes would have on their ability to comply with the listing requirements. And I think the FSCA obviously took account of that process. They took account of the nature of the comments and the level of engagement that the JSE had with stakeholders.
Andre, how far-reaching are these amendments, especially as the aim is targeted at removing the barriers to entry and making it slightly easier for entrants on the market as well as those companies that are already listed?
Well, Tumisang, I think it's important to make the point that this is a process. And when we published our document in 2021, we made that point very clear. This was the start of a process, and it's something that we need to look at on a consistent basis. Regulation is ever evolving, and companies face different challenges at different points in their sort of listing cycle. So we need to take all those things into account. What we did also say is, and our CEO made that statement at our AGM yesterday, is that we will be publishing a further document in the coming weeks, in which we will set out a number of additional proposals to reform our listings regime, to attract more companies, to make the JSE more competitive compared to our international peers. And hopefully that will result in us seeing more companies showing interest in coming to market.
I'm glad that you used the word competitive. Of course, there is an adjacent, stock exchange in South Africa, what is known as the alternative to the JSE, a new entrant on the market. And we've seen a number of companies delisting from the JSE for a number of reasons, obviously. But let's talk about how the JSE is looking to mitigate against the move of companies from the listing.
Yeah, Tumisang, I think the important thing is, and I think the cutting red tape project and the changes we announced yesterday is a very important step in that process. This will give significant relief for companies from a compliance perspective, from a cost perspective, but also very importantly providing management and the board with more flexibility to focus on areas of their business that may be much more important than these sorts of issues. But I think the next draft of proposals that we will be publishing in the coming weeks, and as I said, the big focus there would be to remain competitive, will look at issues that many other international markets that we typically see as our competition have moved on, where we think it's appropriate that we adapt and we align ourselves with some of those proposals so that we can be as attractive to international companies as some of our international peers are.
Have the amendments then been widely welcomed by those who are currently listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange?
Yeah, Tumisang, as I said, in our consultation process, we had very broad support from various stakeholders. Most companies that commented on this and other stakeholder groups were very supportive of the changes. So from that perspective, the takeaway that we've taken is that these changes are well received by the market. It's welcomed by the market. And we think it strikes an appropriate balance between the very important stakeholder groups that we always have to consider, being issuers and companies on the one hand, but then also investors that often have very different interests in these matters. So we believe this strikes an appropriate balance. It will create a more enabling environment for companies to come to market, and it will also make it easier for companies that are listed on the exchange to continue complying with the listing requirements.
We'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for your time. The JSE's Visser talking to us about these new amendments that are coming into effect on the 1st of June.